Hello guys, welcome back to Aeroland. I just finished the previous area of the park and in my opinion the whole area was finished and I'm really happy how the previous area turned out, and it's time to head into the next area. The next area will be a western themed area, and I'm going to start off this western theme with building a river rapids ride. So as you can see, I'm starting to build the station over here right at the start of the area. This way the entrance of the ride will end up pretty much as soon as you enter the area. Because the station is relatively close to the pathway, I decided to start off with building the last part of the ride first, because I had a general idea of how I wanted to have the layout of the ride. So I decided to start off with the back end, as you can see right here. So I built this ride like 1 or 2 days before the last update went live, and that means that the disabled terrain collision tool was not available yet. So you see me raising the terrain all the time around the ride to make sure the ride is below the terrain level. With the latest update you can simply raise the terrain when the ride's already in place, but I couldn't do that at this point of time. So that's why it took me a little bit longer to lay down the ride, and in the end it didn't really give me a big advantage, but yeah, I'm not sure why I wanted to have the whole ride underwater before I started doing the scenery. So anyway, as you could see, I built like 2 big bends at the start of the ride, and over here I'm trying to get a general layout of the path around the ride before building the rest. I wanted the pathway to like bridge over a certain part of the ride, and that's mostly the reason I raised the terrain, to be able to place the pathway like this and then create a bridge from one part to the next, as you can see right there. The biggest downside of these rides is they are pretty slow, and you can make these nice corners, but the ride itself is really slow. And I have like 4 big corners and then the lift going up and then a corner on the top and 1 big drop, and this ride takes like nearly 2 minutes to finish, and that's a real downside, that you can't really have a wild river like feel. You can add these like churning water parts on the track, like you can see in this corner right here, but it doesn't make the ride go any faster. You have to be at a certain declining angle before the ride takes a little bit of speed. Yeah, that's a little bit of a downside, but I managed to make a nice ride, not make it too long. I'm happy. After building the ride, I decided to raise the terrain over here as well, and I had to delete part by part of the ride before raising the terrain, and it took me quite some extra time, but the latest update disabled the terrain collision, at least for rides, still not for the pathways, and I'm very happy with it. But I'll fast forward this because this is not that interesting, all the terrain editing and stuff. The reason I raised the terrain above the ride is because I wanted to create a tunnel, and the ceiling will be pretty high if you raise the terrain after. So I wanted to place the terrain first and then delete parts of the terrain so I could have very low ceilings in the tunnel at certain places. Placing these desert rocks against the wall, the terrain is like a nice guideline for me to see where the rocks have to be placed, and the upside is I can easily see where there are some gaps, but it is not a big of a problem because I just pushed back the terrain a little bit and it's gone. And this ride will be a desert theme, but I chose to use a sandbox scenario of grasslands, so I don't really have a terrain color that really suits the desert colored rocks, and I can use some sandy like terrain textures, but for this ride I really want to have like a Grand Canyon feeling with the big orangey rocks and stuff like that. So I really had to replace every part of the terrain with these rocks to create a nice look for it, and it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of placing rocks, but I don't really mind because it ended up looking really well. You know, it's well worth the time invested to do it this way, especially if you're unable to use the terrain textures from the desert landscape. What I'm trying to do is use the biggest variety of rocks I can, so try to avoid a lot of repeating textures in the walls, so to speak, because this way it looks more unique. So I really want to place each rock individually to create a better overall look instead of placing the same rock 10 times in a row, which is a lot easier and saves a lot of time, but it just doesn't look as good as placing different rocks next to each other. And as you can see right here, sometimes I'm using the same rocks next to each other, but I usually use some other rocks to fill the rock itself, if that makes any sense. Like if I have one big rock, I use some smaller rocks to change the shape of the big rock a little bit. I didn't want to have a straight path, I want to have it like bend around a little bit, because this way, just like the ride itself is bending around in this way, it just creates a nicer flow in the area, I guess, instead of a long straight pathway. And this was a little bit hard because I didn't have a lot of room between the pathway and the ride, but I wanted to cover it up with the rocks as much as I could. So I had to use small rocks, a lot of small rocks, but there was enough difference in height over here, so I made the rocks overhang the ride a little bit. And I can use the overhanging part to place like some water sprinklers or a small waterfall to add some more surroundings to the ride, some more getting wet effects, if you know what I mean, because these rides are basically to cool down a little bit on a hot summer day. And as you can see right here, the ride is really starting to take shape the way I wanted it to, and it's starting to give a real impression how it will look when it's finished. And at the moment I just placed around some of these small cacti and some bushes, just for an example. I wanted to add some of the bigger cacti later and stuff, but this is mostly just to give a general feel of how the ride will look. And now it's time to start working on the layout of the queue line for this ride. At first I wanted the exit to like connect to the western area, but because the ride is so close to the edge of the western area and the Mediterranean area, I decided to just connect the exit to the other area, and if people want to ride the ride again, they can just walk around the corner. That's not such of a big deal. The difficulty, however, was like blending in the western theme of the ride itself with the Mediterranean theme on the exit side. So I decided to just use these grassland rocks or these light brownish rocks and slowly blend them over into the desert rocks. So at first I just placed these along the edges of the exit path to make sure that it's like covered up. And when this is in place, I'm starting to add some of the desert rocks to make sure the ride like slowly blends into the Mediterranean area, and it won't really look weird to have these big bright orange rocks when you're walking on the pathway in the Mediterranean area. As you can see here, I'm just placing a few rocks in between to make sure it looks like it's blending over a little bit more. And from here I'm starting to make the whole wall going like orange. Time to fence off the ride from the public eye a little bit, to make a wall out of these rocks to make sure the ride is not visible. This way you create a more immersive feeling when you're on the ride by not looking at the guest while you're on the ride. And it adds a little bit more exclusivity to the ride itself, so you can, from the outside you can't really see what the ride's like, so you have to really go on the ride to really experience how the ride is. And of course it's nice to be able to see the ride at some places, but not over here at the end, in my opinion. I think it's better to have it like walled off a little bit. Over here I'm blending a little bit of the Mediterranean rocks or into the desert. The track is still green at the moment, but I kept it green for now to make sure I'm able to see if I'm correctly aligning the rocks to the edges of the ride. And I will change the color later, probably to a orangey color to make it look like it really blends over in the surrounding rocks. But I'm definitely not keeping the edges of the ride, the track of the ride, green. So I'm going to place the queue line. As you can see, I don't have a lot of space and I didn't really want to zigzag all the way, so I'm keeping two small open spots in the middle of the queue line to fill those up with some extra rocks or scenery. This is the fast pass line I'm placing over here, and it skips most of the queue line, so that's nice. And these gaps I left for scenery were just a little bit too small to place some nice rocks, but with some nice turning and rotating of the rocks I managed to fit it barely inside, and it doesn't look too bad. And I wanted to have like a dried out tree over here or a big cactus, but I decided to place rocks as well over here. And this space was even smaller than the previous part I wanted to fill up with rocks, so this was slightly harder to fill up. And this was quite funny. Because I haven't completed the train tracks, people kept falling over because the train kept exploding in that corner. Over here I'm just filling up the last little bit of open space around the station. And that's about the last thing I'm doing in this episode, so I'm going to the live part and show you a little bit what I've accomplished in this episode, because it was mostly placing rocks, and even though this episode was 80% of placing rocks, it ended up looking pretty nice. In the live part I'm just slowly going over my plans for the future of this area. So let's see what we've built in this episode. I finally started building the western themed area. This area will be located behind the lakeside village over here. And the idea is that this lake will extend into a river which flows through the western area as well. Next to the river I will be building a small western village. Well, this bridge will be covering up the background. This way the Mediterranean area will be out of sight when you're walking around in the western area as much as possible. In the western village I will build a flat ride and probably a wooden roller coaster or maybe a mine train coaster, which will be probably located somewhere around here. And the train line will be extended through a tunnel through this mountain, and we'll have a second train station in or near the western village. Let's have a closer look at the river rapids I built. The track is quite simple. It starts off with a nice flowing corner over here, and after this corner the track slopes gently with an added rapids effect throughout the small slope. After this slope there's a leveled corner which takes the boat next to the river and onto a chain lift. Part of this chain lift will be built inside a tunnel, and I'm not really sure where I will start the tunnel because I want people to see the tracks from the bridge, so it will probably be a little bit higher up. And when you get to the top of the chain lift there will be a 3/4 around corner which will eventually lead to this big highlight of the ride, and that's a 15-meter drop. I did not really have the room to make a big queue line, but so far the layout has been put in its place. Not really much I can say about it, because it's not really finished, it's simply the layout I built. I will do most of the detailing around this area in the next episode. The exit turned out really nice. You can see how I tried to blend the desert rocks with the light brown rocks, and it turned out pretty good. Over here you can really get the first impressions of how the ride will be when it's finished. It's still very bland at the moment, but when all the rocks are in place around the area, then it will be filled a little bit more with foliage and probably some western scenery items as well along the side of the tracks. Anyways guys, that was it for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like. You can subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with my series, and thanks again for watching. And I hope to see you in the next episode. See ya!